Wonderful, and thank you for your response. Earlier today, we learned how COVID-19 has altered the future and the landscape of our country and our jobs. Now, representatives from the education sector will provide insight into how COVID-19 has created new hurdles for educational attainment and what they are doing to overcome those hurdles. Here to discuss increasing educational attainment after COVID-19 are J.B. Buxton, member of the NC State Board of Education and president of Durham Technical Community College, Dr. Bill Carver, interim president of the North Carolina Community College System, Dr. Andrew Kelly, Senior VP for Strategy and Policy with the UNC System, Dr. David Stegall, Deputy Superintendent of Innovation with the NC Department of Public Instruction, Dr. Hope Williams, President of North Carolina Independent Colleges and Universities, and our moderator, Lynne Barbour, Regional Manager, Strategic Partnerships with WGU North Carolina. Lynne?
Thank you, Deborah. I appreciate it. Well, this has been a great lineup today, and I'm really excited to share some time with our esteemed panel. And we're going to go ahead and kick it off. So it looked like school closures and remote learning were the main concerns and impacts that we've received from the COVID-19 changing our educational landscape. But what I'd like to hear from this panel is, with the start of school fast approaching for millions of families in North Carolina, myself included, 2 kids start on Monday. I hope they're ready. I hope I am. I would love to know, what are some of the things that are keeping y'all up at night? So David, let's start with you.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon. My days and times run together, so I guess it's still morning. And I realize I may be the only panelist with my icon backwards, so I apologize if it's par for the course through this pandemic. Everything's disheveled. So what's keeping me up at night? I'm a parent too, just as you mentioned, and I'm blessed that my children have had opportunities and have the support. But what really keeps me up right now as an educator is 3 things really. Equity of opportunity. There's so many reduced opportunities, things like reduced extracurricular field-based experiences, apprenticeships, credentials of value that are so important for students as they enter the workforce that make them marketable. Those opportunities may not be the same as they have been in years past. Universal broadband is the new barrier to equity, as we all know. A second thing that keeps me up is access and support in a remote environment. We have so many students in a remote environment, from K-12, higher ed, in lots of environments, lots of age groups and structures, but the infrastructure varies. The teacher experience and training with working in a remote environment varies. There's a great difference in presence pedagogy versus a remote pedagogy, and teachers need support as they take on this new challenge. For many of them, it may be their first time working in a remote environment. Many teachers are stretched thin. Some of our teachers are working both with face-to-face and remote environments. The difficult opportunities of trying to take care of the individual needs of students at the same level they're accustomed to, it's going to be a challenge. And that's something we really we're stressed about, and want to make sure we provide support to teachers. Those device and internet access limitations in rural areas that don't have internet or phone services creates great challenges. So that's the second one, access and support. And the third one, to me, is the one that we probably we'll see more and more of this down the line, the social and emotional support needs. For children, their social and emotional needs have not gone away. And in many cases, or some cases, they may be greater than ever. This is a challenge for all of us. This is it's scary in some ways for students because it's the uncertainty. Schools are a safe haven for most students. This their strong support piece, at least one of the strong supports in their lives. They need that layer of support and guidance that's so vital to their development. But it's not just students. I think educators and leaders are also strained and stressed in this hyper-scrutinized environment. Where everyone's wanting to get students back in schools. Everyone wants to do best by all students. Our educators and leaders are also, their social and emotional well-being is a strong, is really a need as well. So those are a few of many things that keep me up at night, and I'm sure many of you share some of those same concerns.
Thank you so much. I know I have some of those as well, especially the social emotional learning. It's kind of, it's stressful to make sure that your students at home are having the interactions and the support that they need when we're working remotely. Hope, can you give us some insight into what's keeping you up at night?
Absolutely, and certainly I share many of the things that David just discussed, but the primary focus and the reason that it is hard to sleep at night is certainly the focus on the health and safety of our students, our faculty, our staff. How can we continue the education progression of our students to become the graduates that will be the employees of many of those who are in this meeting today with us? And still do that safely. So our colleges and universities, as all colleges and universities have been hard at work, making every effort to make things as safe in the environment as possible on campus. Some of our offerings will be online, some will be in person. We are hearing from our students that especially after the move to remote learning last spring, that they really are ready for that in-person experience. They recognize the additional learning that takes place outside just the classroom experience, whether it's walking to class or sitting out on the quad, socially distanced, of course, and with masks. Our students are being asked to sign student compacts, and that they will agree that they will adhere to the requests that we have for them in terms of maintaining health and safety. And we've been working a lot with as our other sectors have of higher ed, with the Department of Health and Human Services to make sure that the guidance that we have will indeed keep our students safe and healthy. And they need to know that those expectations in adhering to that guidance are clear and will be respected.
Thank you, Hope. That's really great insight. And as we all know, the conference has looked at educational attainment strategies that can help us reach the state's 2030 goal of 2 million adults between the ages of 25 and 44 with a high quality degree or credential tied to the needs of North Carolina businesses. So I'd love to hear, how has the pandemic impacted our ability to reach that goal, whether it's positive or negative? Let's start with you, William.
Thank you. It's a call to action, if you will, for the students that come and seek the community college programs. Certainly the challenges of COVID are changing. We thrive on the hands-on, the skilled classes that we have traditionally and historically have done. But we certainly know the value of credentialing. There's a recent study that says that 62% of Americans want skilled training options. And so the community colleges stand ready to be part of this call to action.
Absolutely. Who else would like to chime in on this one? Sure, there's some great insight.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. And hi, everybody. Andrew Kelly from the UNC System Office. And thanks to my fellow panelists. I was glad to see that I was not the only one to choose the gray background. So good taste, everybody who chose the gray. Just a couple quick things on how I think this has affected our work on attainment as a state. And I'll share three things that I think are troubling and one thing that could be a silver lining. So the three that are troubling is, it's pretty straightforward that this has been a significant interruption in the lives of students. And we know from research that students who stop out in the middle of their college career are less likely to ever finish, and they're less likely to come back and get that credential. So they may be leaving with some debt and no college degree, which we know is a recipe for, not a recipe for economic success. So just the fundamental point that students have had their track interrupted. I'd say the second, and it's related, is online learning, which we had to pivot to in the spring, and as Hope pointed out, we're going to be a mix of mostly in person, but also some hybrid and online in the fall. Online learning is not a great fit for every student. We know from research that academically at-risk students tend to struggle in online coursework, particularly when they're remote, and so we've got to really pay attention to the differential impact of that pivot to remote learning on different groups of students, particularly those that where there are pre-existing achievement gaps between low-income students, students by race and ethnicity. That's a big one. And then the last is the obvious financial impact on parents, particularly, and also adult students, who many of whom may have lost jobs and have less financial wherewithal to pay for the cost of tuition fees and living expenses. That's a significant issue, as we all know. Everybody in the audience will know somebody who has lost their job. And the challenge for, I think, the financial aid apparatus is that most of that is backward looking, and so it tends to lag behind economic changes. And so our institutions in the UNC system, and I would imagine at the community college level and the independents, they're going to have to make some decisions about students who are newly in this financially needy category who might not have been, 6 or 9 months ago. So those are three, and the impact of those three things, what we're concerned about and working on is that the impact of those three things would be to widen those achievement gaps that we know, even in a non-pandemic world, are going to make it harder for us to reach our goal. I will share one positive, and that is, I think, the demographics of our state and of the country are such that we're about to hit a plateau in the number of traditional age college students in the country and here in North Carolina. Our plateau is a little bit later than most of the rest of the country because we've been growing, but this has to do with birth rates. People are having fewer children. So what's going to happen is institutions are going to be increasingly competing for that traditional age student. Meanwhile, we've got a lot of adult students, adults with some college, no degree or no credential at all, who would benefit from a university education, a community college education, certainly. And I think some of what we will learn as a set of institutions in our system as we come out of this is how to better serve non-traditional students, because we're going to have to be more flexible and nimble as we go through the pandemic. So I think that could be a positive for our system, and therefore for the state, we'll be better equipped to serve those non-traditional learners after the fact.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Carver, you had a follow-up to that?
Thank you. We want to talk about those credentials of value. As we come out of COVID, we know that it's not going to last forever. Certainly it's very serious, and all of the colleges are taking this pandemic as serious as possible, keeping students safe. But we know the credentials of value. We're working with My Future NC, the Department of Commerce, to offer high quality credentials, third party recognized credentials, stackable, all of those things that you've heard. Just yesterday, the governor himself recognized the work that all of the sectors of education are doing and announced that we're going to receive $15 million in tuition aid for students that want to come to the community colleges to look for these third-party credentials and programs that we are putting in place in this call to action that I already mentioned.
Great, thank you for that. All right, JB, we'd love to hear from you.
Lynn, thank you. And one of the things I think has been particularly maybe a little bit of a surprise at this point is, and President Carver could speak to it specifically across the state, but you generally think of counter-cyclical trends with enrollment in community colleges at times of economic downturn like we're seeing, but you're seeing much flatter enrollment across the state in many institutions. And it's the level of uncertainty at this moment for a lot of families, and the difficulty that I think a lot of families are dealing with in individuals in, one, the reality that whether it's they have a job that they're trying to understand what the future might look like, or they got students they're uncertain how they're going to take care of as they go back to school or not go back to school. The decision to take a course is fraught with other considerations than in a normal environment. So I think there's a level of uncertainty that's been injected and difficulty in just pulling off the opportunity to enroll for a lot of families that's made this different. And then you layer on the economic anxiety that I think a lot of folks feel. And then I'd layer one more uncertainty, which is exactly what this is doing to the nature of the sectors and different occupations in different regions. And so one thing we're deeply engaged in the triangle area here is really trying to understand from labor market data and trends where the sector growth, maintenance, or even declines are going to be, to make sure to position our programs effectively, whether they're going to be short-term credentials like Bill was talking about, or the more traditional associates, arts and science, to be positioned in industries that we know and can tell our students, this is going to move you into a good job and a job that's going to have growth opportunity for you and upward mobility, versus other sectors that may have been strong just 4 or 5 months ago, but all of a sudden are in a very different place. And so I think the uncertainty of the environment, both for colleges and students, is what, to your question about what impact it's having, I think is the most difficult right now. But in many ways, I don't think that's changed people's understanding of the importance of it. It's just changed their calculus, I think, on a timing as much as anything.
And that's a really great point. I mean, we're surrounded by uncertainty, whether it's in the educational landscape, in our personal lives, our professional lives. And the esteemed panel of leaders in education, it's really important that we're both resilient and we're flexible. So I would love each of you to share one tip with the audience that has helped you personally be successful in your approach to this new educational landscape. And I would like to begin with you.
Well, I think that my mindset has been that together we will make it through this. And I think it is together is the key word there. I don't think any of us can do this alone. I think that one of the things we have in North Carolina and a history in North Carolina is of our commitment of working together. And that has never been clearer to me than during this pandemic. We have worked closely with our incredible members of the North Carolina General Assembly who have provided assistance across the state and certainly in education, to the governor who just made an announcement yesterday, the Division of Emergency Management and the Department of Health and Human Services, our members of Congress who have stepped up and provided the CARES Act funding that allowed so much of the other pieces to come into place. We have a lot of needs, and it's costing our colleges, universities an incredible amount of money to be able to do all the things we had to do in the spring and to be ready and safe and well protected and cleaned and sanitized with all the PPE and all of those things. But we've been working on that together, and we've worked a lot with our presidents, our CFOs, our admissions folks, our financial aid folks to make sure from our admissions and financial aid that our high school students weren't penalized as anyway, as all of us in higher ed did with their move to remote learning. So we've taken it on as a group project of us as North Carolinians, and I think that's the only way that we're going to get through it. But we will get through this, and I think we've already seen some progress. We have to stay at it, as Secretary Cohen keeps telling us so well, and I think we can do it together, though. You know, many of our colleges, our first college, Salem, traces back to 1772. We've been through a lot together over the years with all of these colleges, universities, certainly with our schools and companies, and we'll make it through, but it is going to take us all working together to do it.
Thank you. All right, who wants to chime in next?
I'll be glad to talk. Sometimes I'm accused of talking too much, but I'll go ahead. And it's, you know, we have become resilient and flexible in this change. Our faculty have had to change and adapt. The community colleges have had to add in more simulation to take the place of where we had some hands-on. I think it's made us better in that regard and more resilient. One thing that I had to do is in these Zoom calls and meetings, WebEx, all of the different platforms that are used out there today, I've had my phone as a backup. And it makes me wonder about what our students are doing out there. You know, the connectivity that some of them lack, and maybe the phone is the only device in their household. And so we have to be sympathetic and empathetic to to what our students are going through and the faculty. And also the pedagogy that David mentioned earlier. There's certain pedagogy that goes with online and simulation, and so we're getting better at that. But I'm certainly encouraged by what Hope talks about with the cooperation among all the economic and education sectors that we're partnering with, what we're doing to accommodate students, the credentialing, the transfer agreements that we have in place with all the universities and independent colleges. So these things are more important than ever.
You're correct. They are very important. And those transfer agreements are really powerful pathways for our students, and I think are really a great tool for the alignment. So can we get some insight from the Department of Public Instruction, David?
well, I don't want to sound Pollyanna, but education is the great equalizer. We live in a country where your surname and the village you grow up in and the community you grow up in doesn't dictate the success you can have in life. And we've all committed to be champions of this cause. It's our mission field in ways. What this has done is we've had to reimagine and redesign public education for all. It's been challenging and rewarding. We've had to come to grips with traditions that guide us and also some that maybe bind us from growing. So one of the things that's happened through this that has really made my heart feel wonderful and helped encourage me is that communication, I think, is stronger across the state, across fields even. It's not just educators speaking with educators. We've stepped out of our silos. We've lifted up opportunities and voices that maybe otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to speak about some of the issues that are going on. We've had to connect across interagency divisions. I've worked closely, our whole department's worked closely with the Department of Health and Human Services on guidance for schools and daycares and communities. We share resources. The collective capacity has helped us make better decisions. Having constant communication with our supportive state board around true issues that impact students, and not like I mentioned before, having to reimagine saying, we've done this for 50 or 100 years. Is this the most appropriate way to move forward as we come out of COVID and post-COVID? Are there practices that we've done in the past that we don't need to do anymore? Are there approaches that we've taken now that need to be the new norm or take us in a new direction? It's beyond paradigm shifting. It's creating a whole new landscape. So the communication, I think, has been vital. I think calls like this, sharing resources, I think that's the key piece. We've seen districts and communities and counties disregard the typical approach to, they have had to focus so much on their local community that sometimes we create echo chambers, and not because we want to, but because we have so many issues locally, because there's so much uncertainty. We've broken down some of those county and regional barriers, and we're sharing resources. Districts are sharing ideas and training and support and whatever's necessary across county lines and district lines. So that's encouraging. I think our flexibility has proven that we can adapt on the fly, which we've had to, but we also understand that growth comes from, trying things that work and learning from it and scaling up, and then learning from the things that don't work. So I think things won't, no matter how we come out of COVID, things will be very different going forward in the long run. And hopefully, and I'm encouraged to think that it's going to be a better design for education on the other side of this.
I love it. Lots of positive responses, which is fantastic. I'd love to go to JB next, and then we'll close out with you, Dr. Kelly. Okay, great.
Thanks, Lynn. And let me just say how much David Stegall's leadership has meant at a time of uncertainty over the Department of Public Instruction. I think as a state board member, I can say that I think our districts have been well served by some of his experience and temperament, but also sense of aspiration for where we go next. So I just appreciate that leadership, steady leadership he's provided. One thing you asked about is how you a kind of tip for getting through this, and it's certainly to understand that you've got a perspective, but in some ways it's like this little Zoom box. You've got your perspective on this pandemic, but there are lots of different ways that people are experiencing it. And President Carver talked a little bit ago about the GEAR funding and the opportunities it's going to provide. One thing that we learned early, and I think this is system-wide, but certainly at Durham Tech, is the degree to which a lot of folks who were interested in courses were saying, look, we understand your 2-year courses or your semester-long courses, but we need shorter. We need to get back into the workforce. We need credentials. And so we've been able to put together 6 to 8 week short courses in areas like biotech, nurse's aid, core construction, community health worker, and like IT focus. And our focus has really been on unemployed and underemployed to be able to help get them right back into the workforce in jobs that we know are available right now, but need certain reskilling for those individuals. The challenge has been, even at about $250 a pop, that can be a real tough decision for folks who've just lost their livelihood. And so tuition assistance like GEAR is going to be able to provide to allow folks who literally are living on those margins and finding themselves underwater to get back into the workforce is going to be a critical support. in the community college system. And then I'd say, with my state board hat on, the resources through GEAR that are going to be available to hire nurses and social workers and other student support positions at a time when, as many people have talked about, the student support part of attainment is so critical. I think is another clear recognition of where our challenges are right now that'll support our districts moving forward.
Great, thank you. Dr. Kelly?
That's a great segue, JB. Thanks for setting me up. We didn't even choreograph this ahead of time. But what I was going to say is, you know, there's no shortage. I think the pandemic's taught me and taught all of us that there's actually no shortage, no substitute, I should say, for personal interaction and engagement, even if it means that it's personal interaction of the kind we're having now. And just to share a personal anecdote about that, about 2 or 3 weeks into the initial lockdown, I started to have a Zoom call. My wife and I had a Zoom call every Saturday night with some college friends of mine and their wives, and we are still doing it, and it's the highlight of our week, and it's a great opportunity. We've reconnected with people that actually we hadn't been communicating with all that regularly, and so I think there's a lesson there for all of us in education. And just as an example of that, you know, our institutions have had to pivot pretty quickly to providing what they typically provide in person in terms of tutoring, advising, coaching, and so forth, and to do it virtually. And this is an area where we're grateful for the support of the General Assembly through the COVID relief package that they passed quickly in the spring. And I know Representative Fraley's on here somewhere. I'm sure there are other members of the House and Senate on, and just want to signal gratitude for those resources. We set aside some of that money to fund virtual coaching and tutoring at our universities. And so right now we've got you know, a veritable army of student success coaches that are working at each one of our institutions. They're going to receive some centralized training from us, from a third party named Inside Track, which has a track record of success, no pun intended, on this. And they're working with students directly, calling them, figuring out what the students need to be successful, asking them what their goals are, checking in with them on a weekly basis, holding those students accountable for making sure they're meeting those academic goals. That's the kind of high-touch outreach that is important in a steady state of the world, and it's even more important when students are learning remotely and all over the state. So no shortage, no substitute for that, and we've got to think as an industry in higher ed about how we can deliver that stuff at scale virtually in a way that's high quality. And so we're still working on it, but we've made great strides, and thanks in large part to the General Assembly's generosity.
Great, thank you. I'm going to interject an audience question before we move on to the next question that we have for the panel. And so April Wood asked, what advice would you offer students and families as our communities prepare for this school year? And I know we could all say 50 different things, but what would be something specifically, maybe, David, if you want to touch on that for K-12, since we know a lot of schools are getting ready to start.
So what advice would we give to students and families? Well, as a parent, I have a daughter that's a senior, and the advice I've given her is that, you know, the opportunities that she's going to be given this year will be different, and that she too has to be flexible. And you know, the community, I mentioned this before, but communication is more vital than ever, because as Andrew mentioned, without that face-to-face interaction, sometimes you lose some of those connections. So I've encouraged her to, you know, put yourself out there and ask questions, and don't give up those connections you have with your classmates and your teachers, and make sure that the communication stays strong. That's, you know, we have to say that and hope that the intentions from both sides are positive. So if you feel like you've lost some connection, it's likely because it's a whole new landscape, as I mentioned. So we're learning as we go. Let's you know, the intentions, we have to assume the intentions are there, that are positive. So I told my daughter that, you know, you may have to put yourself in some situations, and talking to your teachers in ways that you haven't. You have to make sure that your learning is taken care of, and that, you know, you communicate to them concerns you have, questions you have. It's not upon them to make sure you have it. You're going to have to really strive to connect. So there's a lot of uncertainty. I think parents are as I am, are a little bit worried that this might be difficult for all of us. But I think if we continue to the communication, the connections, I'm rattling because I'm just thinking about the questions I would have. My viewpoint's from a parent who has connectivity, who has a face-to-face instruction, and not every parent does. So as I imagine what their questions will be, they'll be very different than ours are even. But the uncertainty is going to be great. I wish I had a better answer to help them with that. But again, communication, calling, reaching out to the schools, don't leave things to chance. So hopefully the schools and the parents will keep those strong connections throughout this.
Absolutely. And to your point, I would have answered connectivity. I actually yesterday had myself and my 2 kids live stream something at the same time to make sure that we could all do synchronous. But to your point of equity and robust broadband, not everyone even has the ability to run multiple devices or may not even have multiple devices. And so that's certainly something we can't solve in the next 30 minutes, but I know that we all acknowledge that need, and there's certainly efforts that are going on across the states and in the counties to work on that. So with that being said, I think that's a good segue into kind of our next question of being flexible and being, the key words, sympathetic, empathetic, have been mentioned by everyone, I think, today. And so there's been a lot of nationwide demonstrations calling for racial equality, social justice, and I would love to hear from a few of you how that has impacted the strategies for the long-term equity efforts in your communities. And we'll start with you, JB.
Well, I've been proud to join an institution at Durham Tech, and I'm starting my 4th week on the job over here, but for whom equity has been a key principle for many years. And so it's not a new agenda here at Durham Tech and in the Durham and Orange communities, but I would say there's fresh urgency around this agenda and a new focus. And I just offer 2 things. One is, I think the recent conversations and engagement around this issue have brought us to a point where we're not just willing to have deeper discussions or campus-wide conversations, which we're having, but beginning to put real metrics and measurable outcomes around what we're talking about when we talk about equity. What specifically do we mean, and what are the outcomes that we're looking to see in terms of student success, in terms of upward mobility, in terms of what our campus looks like, who's teaching, who's leading, et cetera. So I think it's forcing us to be not just clear about our commitment, but clear about how we measure that commitment and succeed. I think the second thing, I'll give you one example, is it's really had us rethink how we did our resource orientation for the coming semester. Even though 80% of our classes will be online and we've got a virtual advising center, we've set up an in-person resource center to handle students who just don't have the ability to engage in an online environment the same way and need to come in and see people to do advising, to do financial aid counseling, course counseling, find other community supports, find access to laptops, which we can provide. And that just can't be accomplished fully in a virtual environment. And to me, equity means that you find the ways to provide the resources and supports based on the need. And I've been proud of this campus and folks coming together to create a safe environment where students can come on campus and have that. So just one example of where putting an equity lens on student success pushes you to take some new approaches.
Thank you. Thank you for that insight. All right, Dr. Kelly, do you want to provide some from your community?
Sure. This is an issue that is of the utmost importance to the UNC system, obviously, and it's a part of our fabric. We have 5 public HBCUs, which is the largest number of public HBCUs of any state in the country by my count. And in addition to that, we have institutions that have large proportions of students from racial and ethnic backgrounds that are underrepresented in higher education. I want to tip my cap to the chair of our board, Randy Ramsey, and our former interim president, Bill Roper, who appointed a racial equity task force shortly after the events in Minneapolis and then the protests around the country. And the racial equity task force is tasked with meeting with students, faculty, and staff groups to really listen to individuals around the system about their experience, their lived experience, to understand how the experience of different types of students from different racial and ethnic backgrounds might differ, and to get a handle on what's the state of play in terms of equity in the UNC system. We want to get that the task force is going to gather, explore, and develop recommendations and suggestions and feedback, and prepare a report for the Board of Governors with a set of recommendations, and that report's going to be due October 2nd. So there's no time to waste on this, and they are hard at work. The task force is chaired by Darrell Allison, Darrell Allison from our Board of Governors, and has features a set of our board, as well as representatives from the faculty, from the staff, and from our Student Government Association. And this is I think at times we run the risk of task force fatigue, and I'm sympathetic to that. And task forces that produce a bunch of recommendations that don't go anywhere. And I will say that the instructions really from the former interim president and the board chair were this is an effort that's designed to get something done on these fronts. And so I'm proud of what we're doing there. A member of my team, Sean Robertson Edmonds, is the lead staff person on this, and I'm really eager to see where they go and what kinds of concrete recommendations they put down. So I would ask everybody to stay tuned, and I'm happy to say more about that in the Q&A.
Thank you very much. All right, and let's get some insight from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. So how are y'all thinking about, making changes or strategies around these really important topics?
I can think of two things really quick. One is, I hope everyone heard that recently North Carolina, we at the department applied for and received a $17.6 million federal grant to support 45 counties who have the least access, internet access in our state. It's focused on tier 1 counties with the least infrastructure. We'll be doing support and training and resources involved with this over 3 years' time. And the focus of the grant is to erase inequities of access. We know it's become glaringly apparent that universal broadband has in many ways become a basic need for our families. So we see this as one way to hopefully improve on some of those equity efforts and to break down some of those access and equity issues. Another is that the State Board of Ed and our department have committed to a revision of the state social studies standards for K-12. And with this, putting a deliberate focus on racial equity, gender equity, and social justice. We all recognize that our past is an important guide to our future, and we must face our past shortcomings and things that we have learned from with the same vigor as we exalt our triumphs. So we are looking at the social studies standards. We're taking a really deliberate look at how those are structured and how we are using the diversity of thought and experiences and diversity of race, ethnicity, gender, and more they're represented in our standards. And we've committed to make sure we're deliberate about having underrepresented voices and backgrounds with a seat at the proverbial table when we're making these changes. So I think these are important small steps around social justice and racial equality. But I think both of these, we hope to see some deliverables that yield some quality pieces to it. So the access with the grant and social studies standards are two of many that we hope to continue focusing on.
Thank you for that, and that's great to hear. I'm really excited to see what that new social studies curriculum looks like. And so we've talked a lot about the K-12 and the college students they're starting, and the intersections of the underrepresented communities. But I would love to hear from Hope and Dr. Carver, if the two of you could give me a little bit of insight into what ways are your communities ensuring that underrepresented students and the adult populations are having greater opportunities for access to higher education. Because those are, again, a part of that pipeline for that educational attainment goal. We'll start with you, Hope.
They certainly are a part of that pipeline, and it also speaks to the whole question of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because of our underrepresented students, we need to make sure that we're providing them the same kinds of opportunities and ones that they need. In North Carolina, we're so fortunate. Andrew mentioned the 5 public HBCUs. We have 5 private HBCUs as well. And I think together we do have among the most HBCUs in the country in North Carolina. In addition, we have many of our other institutions who have large numbers of students of color. We have 50% of our North Carolina students attending our independent colleges and universities are recipients of Pell Grants, and those are our lowest income students who generally are our underrepresented students. We are 45% students of color among our student population. So we have a lot of representation there. We certainly need to work very hard to make sure that we are even more inclusive, and we are doing that in a number of ways. First, I want to give a shout out to DPI as one of the great partnerships that we have because they worked with us, and now we are able to reach those students. The state has done a great thing in offering the ACT free once to students for that first time. But the last couple of years, there hasn't really been a way of contacting those students to let them know that college is possible. And certainly our underrepresented students are those generally who may not have someone helping them figure out how to make that move to a college from high school. And so we have been able to reach out and contact those students to let them know that college is possible, asking them to take the FAFSA. And I do want to give a shout out to my Future NC. We talked about our goal a little earlier, but the FAFSA certainly has been worked on by CFNC, which we all know, and now is a major, major emphasis of my Future NC. And this is an effort to increase that education attainment goal, as we mentioned earlier. And I think that one of the ways we know we have to work to do that, one is to let students know that college is possible, 2, to get them to fill out the FAFSA to see that it's possible financially, and then to work together to help make that possible for them to attend. And I do want to speak to the adult piece too, though. I think that's extremely important. We, among our NCICU institutions, have had adult programs for many, many years. And we now have, of course, they started out long before the distance learning, but we now have in-person, remote, year-round with cohorts. We have mini semesters. We have evening or day. We have programs on military bases. We have other off-campus programs in addition to our main campus programs. All of those great options for students, because we do know we have so many with some college but no degree. And we want to help make them, all of us in higher ed, want to help make it possible for them to complete that high-quality credential or that degree, which is a part of the My Future NC education attainment goal. We do know that certainly those with some college no degree will need some extra help because most of those have family obligations. They are generally full-time employed. And so taking that step to complete that credential or degree can be an extreme financial challenge for them with all those other responsibilities. But together, that's another approach that we're working on through My Future NC, and we think that together that we can work on both those underrepresented groups and the adult students.
Great, thank you. And the community college system in North Carolina is fantastic and plays such an integral role in these pipelines and specifically for the adult learners. So Dr. Carver, I would love to hear some of your insight.
Thank you for that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my friend, President Hans, who was stolen away and now at the university system, UNC. And I want to just give him a shout out because he started an initiative in a committee that we're doing some peer review to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion on our college campuses to make sure that we are the open door that we say that we are. And I haven't mentioned the open door today, but that is, our proud history that we want everybody to have an opportunity in North Carolina. Our minority male initiative that's historically been around for a long time, and just meeting those student basic needs of the partnership with the John M. Belk and MC Belt Pylon, my friend, if you're listening, MC, thank you so much for what you have done for community colleges in making sure that students have access to what they need in order to focus on learning. My experience at Nash with the Belt folks and what they were able to do with single stop, I can tell you firsthand that we leveraged more resources for students of need. $5 million just at a medium-sized community college in North Carolina through Single Stop, which is a program that had hooked students up with additional resources like food stamps and some other things, because we know food insecurity is one of the things that keep people from coming to college. Career and College Promise, one of the best partnerships in the state that exists with our public school partners. It is students seeking out that college credit classes in high school so they can get college knowledge before they even get to matriculate into their college opportunities. It's just a great example. I know all of our partners, Dr. Williams, even the independent colleges, recognize those credits that students earn with Career and College Promise. And we're offering more online classes than ever. So our adult population, which has been another historical stalwart of the community college system, so the adult population that seeks that credentialing and other stackable credentials or even degree programs so that they can change their economic plight. So it's a lot that's going on at a community college, at our 58 community colleges across the state. President Buxton's already talking about those things that happen, pandemic proof careers, if you will. He mentioned nursing, cybersecurity, construction, and some of the things that we know that happen right now on our college campuses.
Some really exciting stuff. I'll need to look up the open door. And I know at Western Governors, we recently signed some articulation pathways with at least 4 new community colleges, just one of the many options with the other public and private institutions in the state. It's great to have as many options as possible for those students that are transitioning out of the community college. And we'll go ahead, and since you're up, we'll start with you, Dr. Carver, on our last question. So this is a reflection question I'd love to hear from everybody. And then we'll have a few minutes left to dive into any of the questions we might have left from the audience. So as we're reflecting on all the changes that have, and we all know will continue to happen in 2020, what is one thing that could be implemented that could have maybe the largest impact on improving the educational attainment goals across the state?
Well, I think we have a unique opportunity. We've already talked about that. Maybe that's a worn-out phrase, but we have the best intersector cooperation that's going on right now, I think, in the history of higher ed across North Carolina with the CCP that I just mentioned, the UNC system. But again, with President Hans's leadership, I know he wants to tackle some of that common course numbering issues that we still hadn't gotten to, electronic transcripts, so that there are no barriers in transfer, no barriers in access, and that students get the full cooperation and credit that they deserve. The story of the associate in engineering that has happened, it took a long time to hammer out that agreement, but now we got over 30 colleges that offer a clear 2+2 pathway to an engineering. I told President Hans before he left, this elevated the earning power of our graduates to be able to leverage an engineering degree. And thank you to the good knights who have supported the transfer scholarship. I was proud that Nash got 2 of those when I was president, with 2 young ladies that transferred to NC State. And so their education at State in an engineering program was free. So we have this cooperation that's happening right now. As challenging and as tragic as COVID has been, it is not going to defeat us. It will not last forever. And so these are the things that can happen right now when we come out of the fog of COVID.
Great. All right, JB, what about you?
Well, Bill mentioned CCP, and it I think reminds us that back in the mid-2000s, we were a leader in the country on early college, middle college and early college high schools. And we have upwards of 20,000 students who get not just a high school diploma in 4 to 5 years, but also that associate's degree, or at least 2 years of college. To me, we ought to take a page from that and decide that that's going to be the default pathway for all of our high school students and give them opportunities to finish out their high school career with either a credential value or that associate and give them access immediately to continued higher education. I think we can have, rather than just early college high schools, we ought to have early college districts in North Carolina where every high school creates a pathway to either a couple of years of a four-year university or that associate's. And if you think about the pathways that we could create in sectors like nursing, teaching, biotech, where there are clear pathways, IT, that you can go as far as you want, and there are different and stackable occupations where, as far as your interest and aspiration go, you can move into those. The early college for all would give us the opportunity to dramatically increase our credentials and degrees of value, but also I think give students a real clarity early about the pathways available to them and the education they're going to need to achieve.
Right, and that is so important, having those stackable credentials. And we have multiple on and off ramps just represented here today, which I know everyone is collaborating on to make sure that those are as seamless as possible for all of our students, both K-12, community college, adults, learners. Hope, I would love to go to you next and hear some of your insight.
Well, I think that we've done a lot of work, no question, from the time when I was in high school in North Carolina and K-12, growing up here through our K-12 system and into college, and all the changes that have been made to make things more of an even playing field, as we've heard the phrase several times already today. But we have a long way to go. There's no question that we need to increase our educational attainment. And I think one of the questions that was raised that maybe we didn't mention, and certainly want to do this because we're so appreciative of the John Belk Endowment, the Goodnight Foundation, and the Gates Foundation for providing that funding to help make My Future NC a possibility in our state. And just want to give a shout out to all of them and say thank you for that. But we do have, as a part of that educational attainment increase, we still have work to do to have that even playing field, especially in our urban-rural divide. There's no question that students in our urban areas can come up with almost 2 years of AP and IB courses and come into college, whether it's with Career and College Promise or otherwise, just with those course credits, in ways that our rural students, and thank goodness for the virtual public school that can provide some of those courses to our rural areas that may not have an AP teacher in certain areas. But we still have a lot of work to do so that whether a student is coming from Eastern North Carolina, Western North Carolina, or an urban area, that they can come to our colleges and universities with the same amount of rigor and the same choice in courses that our students in our urban areas have had. And we still have work to do there. There's no question about that. Also, we've mentioned the last mile a couple of times, and as chair of MCNC, the board of the organization, the nonprofit in North Carolina that is a jewel in our crown here in our state, that connects all of our K-12 schools, all of our community colleges, all of our UNC institutions, most of our NCICU campuses, except for some that are so rural they can't get there easily. We're working on that, as well as a lot of our healthcare, which is really ramped up during the pandemic, and also public safety. And so we can do the middle mile, and that initial connection to all of our colleges, universities. That will be even more important this fall, as we have many that are both remote and in person. But we still have a long way to go, both for our K-12 students and our higher ed students, to get that last mile there. And we have lots of partnerships with our great co-ops, with our for-profit providers, with our companies out there. And so a lot of work to do there, but those kinds of approaches to even that playing field for our students, I think has got to continue and has got to make even greater accomplishments.
I need to not stop putting myself on mute. Thank you, Hope, for that great insight. All right, so Andrew, we'll go to you next.
Sure. Thanks, Lynn. And I just want to first echo quickly Dr. Carver's words about our new president, Peter Hans. And you know, if you care about the education attainment agenda in North Carolina and you care about My Future NC, I don't think there's a better pick for president of the UNC system on that front. Peter believes in these goals deep down, and is going to go do the work to accomplish them. And I couldn't be more excited that he's leading us here at the system office and the entire UNC system. What I would say is, and I really hope I'm not stepping on Dr. Stegall's thunder here, but I would say that one of the things we're working on here is how do we prepare teachers to teach reading to often our youngest K-12 students, so those in grades pre-K through 3 primarily. Are we doing the job that we need to be doing as preparers of educators to make sure that our teachers are ready on day one, particularly with an emphasis on early literacy. Our board passed a resolution recently that tasks us at the system office with a good deal of work on this, including coming up with a common framework for literacy and what it means to be a teacher of reading, to develop a professional development, set of professional development modules for in-service teachers to come and in the summer learn about the pillars of effective reading instruction. And so, that's a little bit farther off into the future. The dividends from that work will not be as apparent on the attainment front until those pre-K through 3 students make it through to college and through to a degree in a timely fashion. But I think it's incredibly important, and we have an enormous role to play as a preparer of 40% of the public school teachers in North Carolina. So, and I see my friend Susan Gates in the audience. So Susan, thank you for your help on that work and your support on that.
Thank you. And I've gotten the 5-minute notice. So we're gonna wrap up with David, your insight on we've covered a lot of great things. What is one thing that you would love to see implemented that could have the largest impact?
Well, Andrew and many others, I have no thunder to steal, but you certainly have hit on the points, many of what I had hoped to speak to. But as a superintendent, I was a superintendent in Catawba County and Newton Conover School District. And one of the things that we were able to implement, and not just in our county, but in multiple the surrounding counties, an initiative much about what we're talking about now, not looking at education as higher ed versus private versus public versus K-12. It's a continuum, obviously, and they created an initiative called K64. And the reason I bring that up is we recognize that the foundational skills, those university foundational skills like literacy, can't be left to chance. Every student must have those foundational skills in place in those early grades. And then as they matriculate through education, and all the way 64 being closer to retirement, school does not end and education does not end when you walk across the stage for graduation. That's the new beginning from everyone. It's not an ending, it's not a finish line. So we have to continue this focus on the personalization, getting students opportunities. And I feel like I'm reiterating what's already been said, but these credentials, these apprenticeships, these college credits, having children that very much benefited my own personal children, one who's in a UNC system already. And again, I mentioned my daughter's a high school senior. The CCP has been a way for the College Career Promise, has given them opportunities to get college credit while in high school. They have classmates that have gone through the early college system and have unbelievable experiences. So that diversity of opportunity, that personalization and it shouldn't be limited to higher ed versus, again, K-12. We should look at that continuum as we all have a role. We all have share a concerted effort and interest in these students being successful. And calls like this and public-private partnerships, working towards community goals and needs, will continue to grow through past 2020. As we go beyond, it will continue to be a priority and grow in priority. We know that standardization of education is a past mindset, and personalization and need-based education, so that they can go straight into the workforce after their college or after their credentialing experience, where they can be marketable and make a difference in their communities and continue to push our state forward. So I'm excited about what's to come and the partnerships that we've developed and will continue to grow as we go forward.
Great, thank you so much. And so I was looking down at the Q&A, and I think we interjected most of the questions, so we are at time. So I'm sure if there's some other questions, if you want to type them, we can maybe get back to you after the panel. But thank you to everybody. This has been great. And you know, from the public and private institutions to the community college system, which is fantastic, to our DPI represented here. What I've heard, and I hope everyone has heard, is that we all share very common goals. We're all identifying the needs that need to be met, and through working together, hopefully we can really help reach that attainment goal for the state of North Carolina. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to the North Carolina Chamber. Thank you again to all of our panelists. You all did a great job.